Welcome to Lady Mythos. Tonight, I want you to come with me to the very top of the world, to a coastline of black rock and grey water, where the sea can freeze hard as stone, and the sun sometimes disappears for months at a time. In most of the stories we tell each other, the goddess of the sea is someone you love. You sing to her. You thank her for calm water and a full net. But the people of the Arctic did not send songs up to their sea goddess. They sent a man down through the black water, out of his own body, to kneel in front of her in the dark and beg. Because everything they had ever done wrong was tangled in her hair, and she could not clean it out herself. She had no fingers left. And the reason she had no fingers is the part of this story that still stops me cold. Her name is Sedna. In the old tongue, she is also called Sana, which means simply the one down there. It is such a plain little name for such a vast and terrible thing, and it hides one of the darkest and most human stories any people has ever told about the thing that keeps them alive. Because Sedna was not born a goddess. She was made into one by a betrayal, by a storm, by a knife held in the hand of someone who was supposed to love her. And here is the question I want you to carry with you for the whole of tonight, because it sits underneath every single scene. Why would a people spend their entire lives apologizing to a goddess that they were the ones who wronged? If you are new here, come and sit with me a while. Subscribe, pull the blanket up, and stay close to the fire. Because this is a long, cold, beautiful story, and I do not want to tell it to an empty room. And I want something from you in return tonight. As we go, you are going to meet not one Sedna, but four. Four completely different versions of the same woman, told across different corners of the Arctic, and not a single one of them is gentle. By the end, I want you to tell me in the comments which one you believe was the real one. Tell me where in the world you are listening from too, because I love picturing all of you out there in the dark. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when Sedna was not a goddess at all, when she was only a girl who kept saying no. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Refused Every Man. Picture a single sealskin tent on a shore of dark stone, somewhere along the coast of Baffin Island. In front of it, flat grey water stretches out until it simply becomes the sky. There is no line between them. Inside that tent lives a young woman and her father. And, in the most famous telling of this story, that young woman is a great beauty. Everyone says so. Word of her travels from camp to camp along the ice, carried by hunters who have seen her and cannot stop talking about her. And with the word comes a steady stream of men, paddling in from every direction, each one certain that he will be the one she chooses. She refuses them, every single one. One after another, they come to the tent with their gifts and their promises, and one after another, she turns them away without a second look. Too short, too loud, too dull, not good enough. Her father watches this happen season after season, and he moves somewhere between proud
and worried, the way a parent does when a child is strong-willed in a world that punishes people for it. Because this is the far north, and the far north does not forgive stubbornness lightly. I think it helps, before we go further, to understand the world she lived in, because it is not like the mythologies most of us grew up on. There is no king of the gods here, no thunderer on a mountain, no golden court, no creator sitting on a throne handing down laws. The Inuit imagined a universe absolutely soaked in spirit, where every animal and rock and gust of wind had a soul, but was no ruler above it all. What held that world together was not worship, it was rules, taboos, unspoken agreements about how you treat the living and the dead, and the animals you kill to survive. Break them, and no god strikes you down with lightning. Something quieter and far worse happens. The food simply disappears. And in that world, everything came from the sea. The seals, the walruses, the whales. Meat, oil for the lamps, skins for the tents and the boats. The sea was the larder, and, as we will see, the sea was also the grave. So a girl standing at the edge of that grey water, turning away every man who might one day feed her, was doing something more dangerous than she knew. She had a name already, remember? Sana, the one down there. She just did not know yet how literally that name would come true. I want you to like her before it all goes wrong. And that is easy to do, because there is something magnificent about a young woman who simply will not settle. She knew her own worth in a place that gave women very little room to know it. She could sew a seam that would keep a hunter dry in a boat through a whole brutal winter. And she could look a proud man in the eye and tell him he was not good enough, and mean every word of it. Her father half despaired of her and half adored her for it. On the long, dark nights, when the lamp burned low and the wind pressed flat against the skins of the tent, the two of them were a small, warm world of their own. A father and his fierce, unmarried daughter, waiting out the black months together. Hold that picture of them close. You are going to want it later. Then, one still day, a new kayak appeared on the horizon. And even from a distance, something about it was wrong. The lines of it were too fine. The man sitting in it sat too straight, dressed too well for a place this poor and this cold. As he came closer, the birds resting on the water did something strange. They went quiet, all of them at once, as if the whole sea were holding its breath to watch him arrive. Chapter 2. The Stranger Who Was a Bird. He did not come ashore. That is the first detail I want you to hold on to, because it matters. He stayed out on the water, just beyond the rocks, and he called to her from there. His voice carried across the waves, low and warm and sure of itself. And he was, by every account, magnificent to look at. He wore a striking anorak, patterned in black and white, and he carried a spear tipped with pale ivory, the kind of thing only a man of real wealth and standing would own. Everything about him said that here, at last, was someone worthy of her. And he made her promises.
Oh, he made her beautiful promises. "Come with me," he said, "and you will never be cold again. You will sleep on the softest skins. You will eat the richest meat until you are full and warm and want for nothing. You will have a home surrounded by other great houses and a lamp that never runs dry of oil." To a girl standing on a bare shore at the top of the world, where oil for the lamp was the difference between a warm night and a deadly one, those were not small words. Those were the words of paradise. Now here the old storytellers disagree, and I am not going to smooth that over for you, because the disagreement is part of what makes Sedna who she is. In a version Franz Boas wrote down on Baffin Island in the 1880s, the stranger is a fulmar, a seabird of the northern waters, wearing the shape of a man. In other tellings along the same coast, he is a loon, black and white and eerie-voiced. And in a whole other branch of the story, he is not a bird at all, but a dog in a man's skin. We will come back to that dog, because he leads somewhere astonishing. For now, hold all three in your mind at once: a fulmar, a loon, a dog. Nobody agreed. Everybody agreed on what happened next. She said yes, after refusing every honest man who ever came to that shore. She gathered up her few belongings, said goodbye to her father, and stepped into the stranger's kayak. Her father, in the most tender versions, is sad to see her go, but glad too. Glad that his difficult daughter has finally found someone worthy of her. He watches the two kayaks pull away from the rocks and grow small against the water. And he does not know, he cannot know, that he has just watched his daughter paddle willingly into a trap. They travelled a long way, past the last familiar headland, past open water she had never crossed, until the light began to fail and a new coastline rose up ahead of them. This was it. This was home, he told her. And as the kayak drew in, she looked for the great houses he had promised, the warm homes and the soft skins and the endless lamps. She looked, and there was nothing there but bare, wet rock and the deafening cry of 1,000 birds. Slowly, with a cold feeling climbing up through her chest, she turned to ask her husband what this was, and she saw him beginning to change. Chapter 3. Trapped on the Rock of Birds. There were no houses. There was never going to be a house. His home was a ledge of streaming rock, crowded wing to wing with birds, and his palace was a nest, a rank heap of old fish skins wedged into the stone. The soft bed was feathers and bone. The endless feast was raw fish, dropped in front of her by a creature that was no longer pretending to be a man. The fine anorak, the ivory spear, the warm voice out on the water, all of it had been a costume, and now the costume was gone. She had married a spirit, and the spirit was a bird. Try to feel the size of that betrayal. She had held out her whole life. She had turned away every real man who came to her, waited and waited for someone extraordinary. And the one time she finally reached out and chose, this is what her choice turned out to be.
a cold rock, a nest of skins, a husband who fluffed the bedding and brought her fish and did not understand a single word of her grief. She wept. She wept until there was nothing left. And then she wept more. And the wind carried the sound of it out over the water in every direction. There is a line in me that finds this almost unbearable. And I think it is because so many of us know some smaller version of it. The moment you realize the beautiful thing you gave everything up for was never real. The moment the promise turns to feathers in your hands. Sedna was not foolish. She was hopeful, which is a different thing, and the story punishes her for it in a way that feels far too large for the crime. That, I think, is exactly why it has lasted so long. The days on that rock were all the same, and the sameness was its own kind of horror. Grey light that never quite became morning. The endless grating cries of the birds, thousands of them. A noise with no gaps in it, pressing on her from every side until she could not hold a thought together. The stink of old fish and droppings baked into the stone. At night, she lay in the nest of skins, while the creature that called itself her husband settled in beside her, and she stared out at the black water that separated her from everything she had ever known. She had chosen this. That was the thought that would not leave her alone. Out of a whole lifetime of saying no, she had finally said yes, one single time, and it had brought her here. She begged the bird to take her home. She offered him anything she still owned, any small treasure she had left, if he would only carry her back across the water to her father's tent. He ignored her. He had what he wanted. To him, she was not a prisoner, and not a wife, exactly. She was simply his. A thing brought back to the nest. And the nest was the whole of the world he intended to give her. Days passed like that. Then more days. And through all of it, she kept calling one name out into the wind. The only name she had left to call. Her father. She cried for her father. And far away, across all that black water, on the shore where a single sealskin tent still stood against the grey, an old man lifted his head. He had been uneasy for days. The newlyweds had not come to visit, as a daughter should. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his chest, and now on the edge of the wind he thought, just for a moment, that he could hear her. He did not stop to think it through. He walked down to the water and he reached for his kayak. Chapter 4. Her father's kayak and the coming storm. He paddled for a long time, around unfamiliar islands, along coasts he did not know, searching, calling her name and listening for an answer, until at last he found the Rock of Birds, and he found her, huddled in a nest and crying her heart out. Imagine that reunion. Imagine an old man finding his child in a place like that, and imagine her face when she saw him come around the rocks. There was no argument, no hesitation. She climbed straight into his kayak and pressed herself down low, and he turned the boat for home and put his whole aging body into the paddle. The bird husband was not there when they fled. That was their one piece of luck, and it did not last. When he returned to the empty nest and understood what had happened, that his wife was gone, that her father had taken her, something in him turned murderous. he rose up into the air. And here you have to remember what he was, because he was not just a jealous husband. He was a spirit of the sea and the sky. And when a spirit like that is enraged, the weather itself becomes his weapon. The wind came first, then the water. The calm grey sea that had carried the old man out began to heave and blacken, and the waves climbed higher than a kayak has any right to survive. Some storytellers say the bird beat his wings and the storm rose with them. Others say he simply called, and the sea answered like an obedient dog. However it began, the result was the same. A small boat, an old man, and a terrified young woman caught in open water with death rising all around them, and no shore anywhere close enough to reach. The kayak pitched. Water poured in cold over the sides. The old man fought it with everything he had, but he was one aging body against the whole ocean, and slowly, horribly, he began to understand that he was not going to win. The bird wanted one thing. He wanted her, and a cold, ancient piece of arithmetic began to work itself out behind the old man's eyes, the kind of arithmetic that no person should ever have to do. 2 of them would drown, unless one of them went into the water first. He looked back at the storm, that towering black wall of wind and wing. Then he looked down at his daughter, pressed small and trembling against the bottom of the boat, the child he had crossed an ocean to save. And his face began to change into something she had never seen there before, something she would not have believed him capable of, right up until the moment his hands closed around her. Chapter 5. The Knife. How Sedna Lost Her Fingers. He lifted her and he put her over the side. I want to slow down here, because everything in this whole story turns on the next few moments, and they deserve to be felt rather than rushed. Sedna went into the freezing water, and she did not sink. She reached up and caught the edge of the kayak with both hands and held on. Of course she held on. Every living thing holds on. She gripped the side of her father's boat with all the strength she had left and looked up at him. And she waited for him to pull her back in, because that is what a father does. He did not pull her in. He reached for his knife. What happens next is told in the same unbearable way across almost every version, and it is the moment the girl becomes the goddess. As she clung to the boat, her father brought the blade down and took her fingers from her. The first joints fell away into the sea, and as they sank, they changed. They did not drift down as pieces of a broken girl. They turned, in the cold water, into the first seals, slipping away, sleek and alive, into the dark. He cut again. The next joints fell and became the walruses. He cut a final time, and from the last of her fingers came the great whales, sounding down into the deep. Every seal, every walrus, every whale in that entire ocean, born in a few seconds from the hands of a girl her own father was throwing away. Stop and picture what that water must have looked like. A storm still screaming overhead, a small boat pitching in the black waves, and all around it the sea suddenly, impossibly alive. Sleek, dark shapes, turning and diving, where a moment before there had been nothing at all. The whole richness of the Northern Ocean, every animal that would feed her people for 1,000 years to come, rising up out of one girl's ruined hands in the space of a few heartbeats. It is a beautiful image, and a monstrous one at exactly the same time, and the story never once lets you separate them. The food that keeps a people alive was made from the worst thing a father ever did. Some storytellers add one more cruelty. They say that in the chaos of the storm, she lost an eye as well, and that ever after she watched her cold kingdom with a single eye and a heavy mass of black hair. Fingerless, half-blind, betrayed first by the man she chose, and then by the man who made her. And with nothing left to hold on to, and nothing left to hold on with, Sedna slipped beneath the surface and began to fall. But she did not simply die. That is the thing you have to understand. The sea, in this world, is not an ending. The sea has a bottom, and the bottom has a floor, and on that floor, waiting in the cold and the dark, there was a house, and it was hers now. Something opened beneath her as she fell, wide and silent and patient, and it drew her down toward it, and it had been waiting for her all along. Chapter 6. The House at the Bottom of the Sea. She came to rest at the bottom of the world. Not up in some bright hall in the sky, the way so many of our afterlives are imagined, but down, beneath the ice, beneath the black water, in the coldest and lowest place there is. This is one of the things I find most striking about the whole Inuit picture of the universe. For them, the sacred direction is down. The most powerful being there is, and the land of the dead itself, both lie under the sea. It makes a hard kind of sense, doesn't it? For a people whose every meal and every death came out of that same water. The underworld down there has a name, Adlivan, and Sedna became its mistress. The broken girl who could not find a husband good enough now sat at the center of everything, ruler of all the animals that had come from her own hands, and ruler of the drowned dead who drifted down to join her. Picture her there, a stone house lit by a single oil lamp glowing in water that never sees the sun. A woman with a great weight of black hair and hands that end too soon. And all around her, moving through the dark, the seals and walruses and whales. So close that in some tellings they live in the strands of her hair, held against her like the children they truly are. And she was not alone down there. In many versions, her father is dragged down after her, swept off his own shore by a later storm, or simply pulled below to answer for what he did. And he becomes a grim figure in that underworld, a gatherer and a judge of the dead. Some storytellers give him a name, Anguta, and say it is he who ferries the newly dead down into Adlivan and metes out their punishment, pinching and striking each soul in exact measure with the wrongs it did in life. Here the tellings tangle in a way I rather love. Some say the father and Anguta are one and the same. Others keep them separate a stranger father, and a darker lord of the dead. Nobody down there is entirely who they were up above. The dead did not stay forever, at least not all of them. Adliven was a place of purification as much as punishment. A soul lingered there, cleansed in proportion to the taboos it had broken, and only then might it move on, up to a happier land in the sky, some called Kudliven, or back into the world, to be born again. Because in this belief, souls were not spent and gone. They were used and returned, human and animal alike. Which is exactly why the hunt was a sacred act. When you killed a seal, you were not ending it. You were releasing something that would come back around, if, and only if, you had treated it with respect. I find something almost unbearably lonely in that picture of her when I sit with it long enough. She had wanted, at the very beginning, one simple thing: a home, a good match, a warm house, a life like other people had. She turned men away for years precisely because she wanted it done properly. And this is where all that wanting led her. To the loneliest throne in any mythology I know. A cold stone house that no sunlight has ever touched, surrounded by animals that used to be her own fingers, and by the slow drifting of the dead. She got her house at the bottom of the sea in the end. It was simply never the house she meant. Which brings us to the trouble. Because up in the world of the living, one ordinary winter, the seals stopped coming. The hunters went out to the breathing holes in the ice and waited, harpoons ready, the way they had 1,000 times before. And nothing rose to breathe. Day after day, hole after hole, empty. The meat ran low, then lower. The lamps began to gutter, and the people, growing thin and frightened in their tents, did not yet understand that the reason for their hunger was lying at the bottom of the sea, brooding in the dark, with all their fates caught in her hair. Chapter 7. The Sins Tangled in Her Hair. Here is the idea at the heart of this whole religion, and it is one of the most quietly devastating ideas I have ever come across. Every time a person up in the living world broke one of the sacred rules, a taboo of the hunt, a taboo around a birth, a taboo around a death, that wrongdoing did not just vanish into the air. It travelled, it sank, and it settled into Sedna's hair as dirt and grime and knots, a physical filth made out of human wrongdoing, gathering and matting in that great black mass until she could not bear it. Think about what that means. She feels every broken promise as a discomfort on her own body. A hunter who wastes meat. A family that ignores the rights owed to a dead relative. A rule bent here and a corner cut there. All of it. All of that ordinary human carelessness drifts down through the ocean and tangles itself into the hair of a goddess who is already in pain. And in her anger, in her genuine physical misery, she does the one thing that will make the people up above finally pay attention. She gathers the animals to her. She holds them close in the dark, and she will not let them go. And the hunt fails, and the people starve. And it was not only the hunt that could stain her. The old rules reached deep into the most private moments of a life. There were things a woman was meant to do and not do around a birth. There were rites a family owed to a body when someone died. Careful separations between the living and the dead that could not be skipped simply because grief made them heavy. Break those, hide a loss, cut a corner with the dead, and that too would come loose and sink and knot itself into her hair. Nothing was too small to reach her, and nothing was too intimate. It was as if the entire moral weight of a whole people had been gathered up and set down, quietly, on the head of one wronged woman at the bottom of the sea. Now here is the detail that I promised you at the very beginning. The one that still stops me cold, and I need you to hold the whole story in your head for it to land. Sedna is suffering. Her hair is thick with the sins of the living, and it itches and aches and shames her, and all she wants is to comb it clean. But she cannot. She cannot lift a comb to her own head, cannot work the knots free, cannot do the simplest thing to soothe herself, because she has no fingers. And she has no fingers because the very people now begging her for mercy are the ones who took them. Sit with that for a moment. The people did this to her. Their world cut her hands away, and then that same world sinned, and the sin fell into her hair, and now she cannot clean it because of the wound they gave her. She is trapped inside their cruelty twice over. That is not a goddess you send a cheerful prayer to. That is not a goddess you love, exactly. That is a wound the size of the ocean, and the wound cannot be flattered. So the question became a desperate, practical one, whispered in freezing tense as the food ran out. How do you say sorry to something like that? How do you even reach her? You could not shout it up at the sky, because she was not in the sky. You could not send it out on the water, because she was under the water. There was only one kind of person in the whole community who could possibly do it. Not a priest, because there were no priests. Not a king, because there were no kings. It had to be someone who could leave his own body behind and travel, alive, into the country of the dead. And on a night when the hunger had gone on too long, in a dark hut lit low, such a person was already stripping off his clothes and beginning to breathe in the slow, strange way that would carry his soul down to the bottom of the sea. Chapter 8. The Shaman Who Combs the Goddess's Hair. The Inuit word for that person is angakuk. We might reach for the word shaman, and it is close enough to start with, but it undersells what this man was about to do. He was not going to pray. He was going to make a journey, a real one, down through the floor of the world, and he was going to come back and tell everyone exactly what he had found. The people gathered in the dark around him and went silent, as instructed, while he sank into a trance, and his soul came loose from his body and slipped away, downward, into the cold. The road down was not empty. The storytellers describe it as a genuinely dangerous passage. guarded and barred at every turn. He had to pass through the churning water, cross an abyss, and get past the creatures set to keep the living out. In the tradition around Igloolik, where the sea woman is called Takanaaluk, the horrible one down there, a great dog lies at the entrance to her house, and the shaman must slip past it to reach her at all. This is not a gentle pilgrimage to a kindly grandmother. Everything about the descent is designed to say, turn back, the living are not welcome here. And then he reaches her, and even now it is not over. Because Sedna does not simply forgive on sight. In many accounts, before he can help her, he has to fight her. He has to wrestle the goddess herself, grapple with all that grief and fury made flesh, and prove that he will not be driven off. Only when he has held on through that, held on the way she once held on to her father's kayak, does the real work begin. He takes her heavy, filthy, matted hair into his hands, the hands she does not have, and he begins, slowly and carefully, to comb it clean. Picture it, a living man at the bottom of the ocean, in the lamplight, gently working the knots and the grime out of a goddess's hair while she calms beneath his hands. Combing out the sins of his own people, one tangle at a time. It might be the strangest and tenderest image in all of world mythology. And it is the exact opposite of every thunderbolt and every burnt offering you have ever heard of. There is no sacrifice here. There is no fear-struck groveling. There is a wounded woman, and someone patiently, humbly, tending the wound the world gave her. And as her hair comes clean, her anger drains away with the grime. Soothed at last, Sedna opens what is left of her hands and lets the animals go. They pour back out into the sea, the seals and the walruses and the whales, streaming up toward the breathing holes and the waiting hunters. And up in the living world, the harpoons finally strike, and the lamps burn bright again, and the people eat. The shaman returns to his body in the dark hut, gasping, and he tells them what she told him, which taboos were broken, who must confess, what the people owe. The lone shaman's descent was the emergency measure, the thing you did once the hunger had already come. But the people also honored the sea woman together, out in the open, in one of the strangest ceremonies the early outsiders ever set down on paper. Franz Boas watched a version of it and wrote it down. 2 figures would appear in the camp, acting as her representatives, their faces hidden behind masks of tattooed sealskin, as though a piece of the deep itself had come briefly up onto the land. What they did was part blessing and part wild theatre. They moved through the gathered people, pairing the men and the women off, sending each couple away together. They called up the good north wind, the wind that carried the hunting weather. And then, in the strangest turn of all, the people fell upon the 2 figures with a great roar, pretending to spear them and strike them down until the pair collapsed as though dead. A moment passed, and then the figures stirred and rose and came back to life, and in low, murmuring voices they answered the people's questions about the winter to come and the fortunes of the hunt. It was a way of touching Sedna's world without dying to reach it, a way of bringing a piece of the deep up into the firelight for one single night. But this goddess forgets nothing. She keeps a careful count of every sin that is ever combed out of her hair. And I have always wondered what, exactly, a shaman had to promise her down there in the cold and the dark, to make her open her ruined hands even once. Chapter 9. The Four Faces of Sedna. And now I have to be honest with you, the way the old storytellers were honest with each other, and admit that everything I have just told you is only one version. The most famous one, yes, the one most people mean when they say the name Sedna. The travel across the Arctic, from Greenland to the coast of Alaska, and the same woman splits into 4 different faces, and they do not agree on who she was or what she did to deserve the sea. Remember, I asked you at the start to decide which one you believe. This is where you meet them all. The first face is the one we have followed all night. The proud, beautiful girl who refused every man, was tricked by the bird husband, and was thrown overboard by her own father in the storm. This is the telling Franz Boas wrote down on Baffin Island, and it is the one that became famous. But hold it loosely, because right beside it stands a second face, and she made a very different choice. In this version, Sedna is not tricked at all. She is simply dissatisfied. She refuses the men her father chooses for her again and again, until at last, in defiance, she takes a dog as her husband. And from that union come children. And when her father scatters the family, the dog children are set adrift across the water in a little boat, and they become the ancestors of other peoples entirely. Some tellers say it is through those drifting dog children that the Inuit are related, distantly, to the strangers who would one day come from across the sea. The third face is the one that hurts the most, I think, because there is no romance in it at all, not even a false one. In the Netsilik telling, Sedna, often called Nulia Jukia, is not a proud beauty and not a rebel. She is an orphan, a small, mistreated, unwanted child, pushed to the edges of the camp. And one day, the people simply decide to be rid of her. They take her out onto the water to drown her. And when she clings to the side of the boat with her little hands, they chop her fingers away and let her sink. No bird husband, no jealous storm, just ordinary human cruelty. A community deciding a child is disposable, and a sea goddess born out of that shame. And then there is the fourth face, and she is the one nobody expects. In this version, Sedna is no victim at all. She is a giant, a daughter of the creator himself, born with a monstrous, endless hunger. And that hunger grows so vast and so uncontrollable that one night she turns on her own sleeping parents and begins to devour them. Horrified, her father drags her out to sea and throws her over the side. And it is her own giant's body that sinks to the bottom to rule the deep. A tricked bride, a defiant rebel, a murdered orphan, a cannibal giant. 4 women, 1 ocean, and the storytellers could never agree on which of them is really down there. They could not even agree on what to call her, and the names carry the disagreement with them. In Greenland, she is Sasuma Arna, the mother of the deep, which sounds almost tender. Among the Copper Inuit, she is Arnap Kapfaluk, the big bad woman, which does not sound tender at all. Around Igloolik, she is Takanaluk, the horrible one down there. Elsewhere, she is Nuliajuk, or Uinigumasuituk, the one who never wanted to marry, or simply Sana, the one down there. Same goddess, same missing fingers, same black hair in the dark, and a whole Arctic full of people who could never quite decide whether to pity her or to fear her. So which one is real? Which face is the true face at the bottom of the sea? Hold your answer just a little longer, because it is not quite the question it appears to be, and the last piece is waiting for us at the very bottom. Epilogue. What the Inuit still owe the sea goddess. Here is what I have come to believe after living with this story. The reason it does not matter which of the four faces is real is that all four are telling you the same thing. A tricked bride, a defiant daughter, a drowned orphan, a devouring giant. In every single version, someone throws a girl into the sea, and her hands become the world's food. And afterward, the whole of humanity depends on the mercy of the person they discarded. That is the truth underneath all four faces, and it does not change, no matter which one you pick. This was never a story about who Sedna was. It was a story about what we owe her. So let me finally answer the question I set down at the very beginning. Why would a people spend their whole lives apologizing to a goddess they themselves had wronged? Because that is the only honest relationship a hunter can have with the thing he kills to live. The Inuit did not build a religion of love with a kind god smiling down. They built a religion of respect and of amends in the hardest classroom on earth, a place where nature can starve you to death in a single bad winter. Sedna is that bargain made into a person. She is the sea's memory of everything taken from it, sitting at the bottom of the world, deciding whether to forgive us one more time. And she is still here, which is the part that moves me most. Today, Inuit artists carve her and paint her by the thousand, and in their hands she has become something new. As the sea ice thins and the Arctic warms, contemporary artists have made Sedna the face of the climate itself. In one striking work by the artist Floyd Kuptana, the sea goddess has become a boat, lifting up the people drowning in a rising sea. In the Prince of the Great Kenojuak Ashevak, she surfaces again and again. The betrayed girl at the bottom of the ocean has become a symbol of the ocean's own suffering, and of a people's endurance, and of the stubborn survival of stories that were told aloud for centuries before anyone wrote them down. Which is worth pausing on, because these stories very merely reached us bent out of shape. Almost everything we have was written down late by outsiders, by the anthropologist Frans Boas, by the explorer Knut Rasmussen, by missionaries like Hans Agither, men who came with their own faith and their own assumptions, and sometimes softened the hard edges as they wrote. The tidy, pretty mermaid, Sedna, that drifts around the internet, is a sanded down thing. The real tradition is stranger and darker and far more honest, all mutilation and betrayal, and the goddess who is feared as much as she is loved. And it belongs, still, to living people who still feel its weight. That is worth remembering every time her name is borrowed. You have heard her name borrowed already, in fact, and maybe never known it. Far out at the frozen, distant edge of our solar system, there is a small, cold world that astronomers found in the year 2003, and they named it Sedna, for its terrible cold and its terrible distance. A fitting tribute to a goddess who rules the coldest, lowest, most far-off place the Inuit could imagine. And if you listen to the shape of her story, you will hear echoes of others you already know. The master or mistress of animals, honoured by hunters across Siberia and the Americas before every kill. The shaman who flies out of his body, a cousin to the drum-carrying spirit travellers of the Sami and the Siberian north. Even a faint rhyme with Persephone, another young woman taken down below and made a queen of the dead against her will. But where those other stories often turn the woman in the water into something beautiful and safe, a mermaid to be rescued or wed, Sedna refuses. She is not the pretty mermaid. She is the wound the mermaid was invented to cover up. There is something in that idea that I think our own louder world could sit with for a while. Here was a people who built their entire spiritual life not around being forgiven by a perfect God above, but around making amends to someone they had harmed below, who understood, right down in their bones, that you cannot take and take and take from the world and the water and never once say sorry. Sedna is frightening, yes. She withholds, she remembers, she makes you send a living man to the bottom of the sea to face her. But she is also, in her strange way, the most honest goddess I know of. She only asks that you never pretend the cost was nothing. So come back with me, one last time, to where we started, to the dark hut and the man breathing strangely on the floor, his soul sinking down through the black water toward a house at the bottom of the sea. Down there, a woman with too much hair and not enough hands is waiting, and everything his people did wrong this year is tangled and aching in her hair. He will reach her, he will fight her, and then he will do the gentlest thing and comb her clean and beg. Because every seal that will ever rise to a breathing hole, every wail that will ever sound in that black water is still a piece of her hands. And every hunt, in the oldest tellings, is still a quiet apology to a girl who was thrown away. If this story moved you tonight, stay a while. Like it, leave a comment, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Tell me which of her 4 faces you believe was the real one, and tell me where you were listening from. Until then, thank you for listening. Yours, Lady Mythos.